I was a virgin when I met Valerie Stein, playing piano at the Subway bar and grill near St. James's Park tube station to make ends meet. To me, Valerie was a woman of the world, radiating sexiness and confidence. She was gorgeous and 3 years younger than me. Over the next months, I couldn't help but watch her move while waiting tables and peek at her barely covered buttocks as she bent over. Male visitors constantly harassed her. She had a way of turning them off without offending them. Valerie noticed me looking at her and winked at me. A short time later, she returned with a soft drink for me. "Thank you," I said, wanting to say something witty to impress. I realized that I had to say more than just a stuttered, hello, Valerie," every time we met on work evenings. Knowing that she used the subway to get to and from the bar, I waited at the entrance until she finished clearing the tables. I waited for her to come out the back door of the bar where we finally met face to face. I quickly said, "Valerie, can I give you a ride home?" She answered in a seductive voice, "How do you know where I live?" Stumbling, I blurted out, "I'm sure it's next to my seat, so sit down." I held the passenger door open and she got into the car. Then, giving me directions, I drove off. Unfortunately, it was in the opposite direction from my apartment. "Well, that's the price of falling in love," Valerie asked. "How long have you been playing the piano? You're really good at it." I spoke briefly about my university years, pursuing a degree in music studies. "How long have you been a waitress?" I asked. She replied, "Since I left school, for 4 years now." My eyes kept darting to her short skirt and long legs, and she caught me doing it and grinned. But she didn't do anything about the shortness of the skirt. Suddenly she said, "Here we are. This is my home here. Thanks for the ride." She left a kiss on my cheek and disappeared into the building. I waited to see which apartment she would enter while looking out the window. There she stood at the window and waved her hand to me. I waved back, then drove back to my apartment with a smile on my face, a soft kiss on my cheek, and feeling like I was on cloud 9. On the way home, I reminisced about my university days. I dated some students from my university, and we had a few make-out sessions, but second dates rarely happened. I was always shy about girls, especially if I liked them, which made me hesitate. Luckily, I was too busy studying to date much, having ambitions of getting a music degree. As I became more confident, the relationship between Valerie and I developed quickly, and we soon began dating in our free time. We were mutually attracted to each other, and it seemed that it was impossible to stop, like two magnets. We spent time with each other, had a picnic in the park, fell asleep under a willow tree in each other's arms. We rode bicycles on London's cycle paths. Nothing expensive, simple things, but while we were together, we found pleasure in it. Lying on a rug in Hyde Park one lazy Sunday afternoon, Valerie told me that she had left school at 16 and had been working various part-time jobs in cafes and bars for the past 4 years. Last year, she finally got a full-time job working as a cocktail waitress at Subway Bar and Grill. I told Valerie that my parents saved and saved for my university education. While studying, I worked part-time in local pubs to save money to buy tools, books, and other things. Now I can play the piano, saxophone, clarinet, acoustic guitar. I wanted to do something more with my life than just teach music to schoolchildren. Getting a job as a pianist playing background music during dinner was a start. Our romance blossomed, and within 6 months, we became a couple. Valerie moved into a larger apartment with me. Valerie taught me about sex and how to please a woman. To this day, I clearly remember our first night together. Valerie was fascinated by my artistic nature and enjoyed it when I played for her. Realizing my musical abilities, she encouraged me to spend my days composing while she worked part-time at the cafe, encouraging me to write more music. But I noticed that Valerie also had a tough side. She had a sharp tongue and remembered past events and regularly brought them up to confuse people. One day, after a hard day at the cafe, Valerie came home and found me hard at work on notes. I got so carried away that I didn't do any household chores. She flared up. "You sit at home on your ass all day, playing the guitar, while I work at work." She showered me with abuse. I tried to understand why it was her idea. I don't know how to handle conflict and am generally shy. She could be tyrannical at times. One morning after a particularly nice hot night of sex, I heard her singing in the shower while I was making my morning coffee and realized she had a great musical voice. Now it was my turn to teach Valerie, in this case, how to sing and hold a note. We spent 3 months working on Valerie's voice, training her voice. I also taught her the basics of reading music. Eventually, I convinced my old retired high school music and choir teacher to help Valerie improve her singing voice for a small monetary reward. While I continued to write the musical parts, Valerie helped with the lyrics. We created 6 songs, but Valerie's favorite was the first song I wrote at university. The Cuckoo's Lament is a mother's lament about the loss of her little child. We auditioned for the owner of Subway Bar and Grill. I played the piano and Valerie sang. He offered us a 30-minute musical set every weeknight. Valerie continued to work as a waitress, and I continued to play evening music. But we got the opportunity to perform together on stage in front of an audience every weeknight. Some patrons danced on the small dance floor in front of the stage. There were pop bands playing there on Friday and Saturday nights, and we weren't needed there. I recorded our evening performances, which I later edited. I took the completed recordings to various London music studios, but I never managed to break into the music world. However, this hasn't stopped us from getting small gigs at weddings, parties, dinners, and other events around London. We were managing with money and decided to paint the apartment, enjoying this activity together. Together, we put together a bookshelf from IKEA. I bought a new sofa and a big TV. We spent the weekend traveling through the Surrey Hills south of London, stopping at a pub for the night. Our favorite was visiting the Brighton seaside, running along the beach, getting wet from the waves, making love in a secluded cove. Late one night in bed, I asked about her family. She said that she left home 2 years before she turned 18. A year later, her mother and father died in a car accident. Her father was drunk. After this, Valerie's brothers and sisters were sent to different relatives, and since then she has not seen any of them. The next Saturday night, I asked Valerie to marry me. She almost tortured me to death with sex. This was probably her answer. We played a simple ceremony in the registry office, which my mother was not very happy about. But times were difficult, and we loved each other. Our future looked promising. We were still performing at the Subway Bar and Grill on weeknights when I learned of a part-time job playing evening music at the Gentlemen's Club for members and their wives. The club's regular pianist, an acquaintance of mine from university, became seriously ill, so he suggested that I apply for the job. The pay was very good, and we were free on Saturday evening. However, the club manager wanted an audition, so I brought Valerie to do a duet. The manager was impressed with our performance after a year of improvement. He hired us and explained the clothing requirements, so we had to buy some clothes. After 6 performances at the Gentlemen's Club, one evening, during the break, a man in a £5,000 suit approached us. He introduced himself as the CEO of Emmy Music. He praised Valerie for her singing and saw her as promising in the music industry. He gave her the name and number of Emmy's music manager and told her to call him on Monday morning to set up a demo session. We rehearsed most of Sunday on a few songs I wrote and a few more as backup. Valerie called at 10 o'clock Monday morning and got in touch with Don Thomas, the music manager. They talked for a while, where Valerie outlined her experiences with singing over the past year and a half. A meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon. They were surprised when Valerie came with me. We were escorted into the control room of the recording studio. They sat me on a chair in the corner and ignored me. At university, I had worked with large sound consoles, similar in size and function, and was familiar with their characteristics. But I kept my comments to myself. After Valerie discussed the various songs, she was taken into a small booth with headphones and a microphone. Valerie made several demo recordings and then asked for a piece of music that she was familiar with. The song was called The Cuckoo's Cry. Valerie explained that the music was written to suit her vocal range. Impressed by the song and its recording, Don suggested recording the song as a demo track. When it turned out that I wrote the music and lyrics, I was invited to record the piano and guitar parts. The engineer Bob spent the next few hours working on the song, adding double recording and some harmonizing by me and Valerie. We were eventually thanked and told that the song would be presented to a committee to determine whether it should be released to radio stations as a single. Don said he would contact us. "Don't call us. We will find you ourselves." A month later, Valerie received a call and was asked to re-record The Cuckoo's Cry with orchestra accompaniment. I was not required during recording, but I have been offered a position as a studio musician for the sessions and will volunteer as needed. The Cuckoo's Cry surprised everyone and quickly shot to the top charts, staying there for 2 weeks. Valerie's career took off. 6 months later, continuing the success of her hit single, Valerie recorded an album of my songs with our lyrics, which also took first place. Valerie's money flowed like a river. My income wasn't that impressive. I continued to write sheet music and play solo evening music at the Subway Bar and Grill on weekdays, and once a month at the Gentlemen's Club. Valerie became too big a star to perform there, so I started doing it on my own, as I still enjoyed the opportunity to entertain people and have fun doing it. We moved into a penthouse big enough for 6 people. Her manager insisted she needed it for the parties and guests staying with us. But most of the time I was there alone. She was constantly leaving for interviews on television or radio. Parties with celebrities such as Elton John, Paul McCartney, Robbie Williams, and others. Impressed with my musical abilities, Emmy offered me full studio work for a fantastic session fee that I couldn't refuse. Bob, the sound engineer, and I became good friends. He was impressed by my musical achievements and recommended me to other artists as a songwriter. We spent many hours together in the following months with other musicians, creating background music for many artists. I quickly wrote a song for a relatively unknown male singer who was heading to the US. The song became his first big hit in the States, so session music became my main source of income. But I still enjoyed my month of performing at the Gentlemen's Club, and all I now need is a woman's voice to accompany me. The best way to find out what Valerie was doing was to watch TV, public news. I could no longer contact her on her cell phone because her personal assistant was intercepting all calls and telling me that Valerie would call back. But I heard Valerie's voice in the background saying, "I don't have time to talk to him right now." Valerie returned home at 7 in the morning without any explanation as to where she had spent the night. She didn't offer me a kiss or a hug, went straight to the shower, then changed clothes and went to a work lunch with some music director for her first live concert. Valerie said with some pride that she would earn £500,000 in 3 hours on stage. Ted Wild's band was number 2. Valerie was the star of the evening. I asked, "Do you need help?" To which she replied indifferently, "Everything is in the hands of the concert director. They don't need or want your help. Can you get me a concert ticket?" She replied with half-hearted enthusiasm, "Of course, dear." Her next question was, "Where's my next song?" We haven't had sex for 3 months, and she wants a song. I didn't see Valerie for a week before the live concert in Edinburgh, and then for a week after the parties. There was no point in trying to reach Valerie. Her pa simply brushed me off. So who knew where she was? I never got that concert ticket. The concert was a great success, and I was lucky that I could watch it on TV. I noticed that her voice didn't reach some of the high notes, perhaps due to stage tension. Her ego was so big now, there was no room left for me. Now, 15 months after her first hit, 3 subsequent singles from the album also reached the top 10 of the top 40 charts, written by me, by the way. Valerie's first song was nominated for a British Music Award. 2 months later, we attended an awards ceremony where she was awarded a gold disc. It seemed like I could accompany her because I wrote all her hit songs. That night, we attended a party in her honor among all the other celebrities and hangers-on, full of their own nonsense. It just wasn't my thing. No one here was interested in what I had to say, so I retreated to the side into the garden. Sitting on a bench, I was humming a tune that had been playing in my head for the past few days when I heard a woman's voice. Are you humming to yourself, or are you just happy? Her well-placed feminine voice took me by surprise, jerking me out of my reverie. Not only did she sound great, she looked beautiful too. Although she was not as strikingly attractive as Valerie, I could see from her face that she had an inner beauty. I stood up and said, "Hi, I'm Peter," holding out my hand. She was about 5 feet 7 inches tall, with brown hair, well-built with small breasts and a slim waist. "Helen," she replied, shaking my hand. "Who are you here with?" I answered awkwardly, "With Valerie." Then he asked, "Who are you with?" Without answering the question, Helen suggested, "It looks like we're both black sheep here." Finding nothing to talk about, we sat in silence. Looking into the main ballroom, I saw Valerie with her arm around some young songwriter, Bill Bean. Valerie gave him small touches. Bill wrote a minor song for a pop-rock band that had Ted Wilde as lead guitarist. The song peaked at number 5 on the top 40. Ted had a big ego and boasted that Bill was the next top songwriter. Helen suddenly broke the relative silence of the garden and said, "Ted Wilde was my date, and he's a real idiot." "So how do you know him, and why are you here?" Short story, I'm his accountant. I met him for the first time last week to sort out his taxes for previous years. Now that he's making a lot of money, the IRS is after him. He loved me at first sight and invited me to the awards ceremony. I didn't answer, so Helen continued, "So you're married to Valerie and you're her songwriter?" "Yes, it's me," I answered in a sad voice. "Okay, is that tune you were just humming your next top 40 hit?" She seemed to be well aware, so I told her about the new song I was putting together. Helen suggested using the piano in the music room so she could hear the notes. Leading me down the hallway to my room, Helen explained that she had been involved in music studios and sung in the school and church choirs throughout her school years. I played the melody on the piano. It took a couple of tries to find the right key. Helen quickly got into the swing of things and took over playing the piano. I picked up the guitar and we played the chorus together until we got the chorus down. I was impressed by her musical ability, and I asked if she would be interested in playing evening music with me at the London Gentlemen's Club once a month. Having received an affirmative answer, we exchanged phone numbers. We were still rehearsing when we were interrupted by Valerie, Ted, and Bill. Valerie announced, "We were wondering where you both went." Bill chided me, saying, "You have no idea how to play guitar." I let him think what he wanted, not wanting to argue. As we all left the room, Ted asked, "What instrumental tune were you playing?" I said, "Oh, it's just a melody stuck in my head." In the limo on the way to the apartment, Valerie told me that Ted had promised to write a song for her. I replied that it couldn't hurt if she worked with different people. She thanked me with crazy sex, just like in the old days before our wedding. But it was only sex, there was no love in it. I kept wondering if she was bribing me to write her a song, or if she felt guilty for some reason. I couldn't help but wonder what happened to our relationship. The next morning at breakfast, Valerie asked, "Who is that woman who played the piano last night?" I replied, "It was Helen, Bill's friend." Valerie scolded me, "I hope you didn't play my next song for her. When will the song be ready to record?" She still needs some work, but soon. Then again, if Ted writes her a song, why does she need mine? Therefore, I decided not to rush to complete it. With these words, she told me, "I'm leaving to host the Sunday celebrity show," telling me goodbye indifferently, I still love you, and left without waiting for an answer from me. I shouted after him, I love you too. But I began to wonder if I really loved her. She has changed so much. I called Helen asking if she could play evening music at the Gentlemen's Club the following Saturday. I needed a pianist and singer for next Saturday. She said yes, that she would be happy to do it, and we agreed. I didn't see Valerie for the first half of the week. She then stormed in with her entourage on Wednesday afternoon. She explained that she would spend the rest of the week, including the weekend, at Ted's country house, tuning his song for her. The Emmy Studios were booked for a Monday morning recording session. Helen proved to be a great success at the Gentlemen's Club, receiving applause for her performance. The club manager praised me for finding such a talented singer. He hoped we wouldn't lose her in the pop world. When I arrived at the Emmy Studios on Monday afternoon, Bob told me that Valerie and Ted had left. Bob and I have become good friends over the past 2 years. We spent a lot of time together in the studio and a few evenings in the pub. He told me that the song Ted wrote was terrible. It had no rhythm or rhyme. The text was terrible. They stopped recording at lunchtime. By this time, Ted and Valerie were so drunk that Valerie couldn't sing to the beat, and Ted just giggled. With a sad face, Bob continued, Peter, we've become good friends, so I can't leave you in the dark. He continued, I walked into the men's room at one point and heard Valerie and Ted having sex in the women's room. She was screaming how good he was. He asked, Am I better than him, bitch? She replied, Much better in every way, lover. I was broken and didn't want to believe what Bob was telling me, but deep down I knew it was true. So I left Emmy and drove to our apartment, tears streaming down my cheeks. When I arrived, I looked around. There was nothing of mine here. Everything was plastic and fake. I decided to packed only a few things to support myself and left most of it, not wanting to alert Valerie to my possible intentions. If she had a full-blown affair with Ted, there won't be a second chance. I checked into a cheap hotel on the other side of town. Call me a fool, but I still loved her. So I called Valerie that Monday evening to give her a chance to mend our deteriorating relationship. She replied, Hi, Peter. I heard laughter in the background. What can I do for you, Peter? More laughter in the background. I asked, Valerie, are you coming home tonight? She snapped back, Listen, Peter, I want to live my life. I don't answer you, get it? Then she hung up. Valerie didn't even seem to miss me after 3 weeks of silence. She finally called to say that she was going to California for a week for the American Music Awards as a special guest and would be away for 2 weeks. I considered hiring a private investigator, but ultimately their obvious display of affection for each other made everything clear, including sharing a hotel room. I contacted a lawyer about my missing royalties, which seemed to stop while Valerie's songs were doing well. My lawyer discovered that the funds had been transferred to her account. I asked him to look into this. I needed money to pay for a hotel stay because I refused to move back into an apartment. I was watching the American Music Awards on TV to see Ted accompanying Valerie. Press photographs showed her entering an exclusive hotel on Sunset Boulevard on Ted's arm. So I sent her a message to make sure that our marriage was truly hopeless. Where are you? I'll come so we can spend time together. But she never answered. A month later, television news reported that they were in Jamaica, sunbathing and sharing a hotel room. There were rumors that Valerie and Ted attended sex parties at celebrity homes in Kingston. I moved all my stuff out of my flat and found a small flat in North London. Television news reported that Valerie and Ted had returned to London at Heathrow Airport. They found drugs in Valerie's luggage and, strangely enough, there was nothing in Ted's luggage. When she objected, claiming that it was not hers, she was detained and searched. This was big news the next day. Top 40 star Valerie Stein was charged with drug offenses with a hefty fine. Her manager posted her bail. When she finally returned to the apartment and found that I had moved out, She called me. "Where are you? Why did you move out?" I simply replied, "I want a divorce." She laughed on the phone, saying it was just sex. I didn't agree and hung up. The divorce was messy. Valerie, through her lawyer, fought tooth and nail to reduce the amount she had to pay me. However, she could not afford the delay, putting her career on pause. If her name disappeared from the top ranks for too long, people would start to forget. She agreed, and I received my due fees and half of the property after the divorce. Valerie and Ted began living together in an apartment. She told everyone that Ted's next song would take her career back to the top. However, when the single was released, the best it could achieve was number 20 on the top 40 chart. It didn't have a solid beat, and it wasn't in the range of her voice. It was a failure for her. Valerie called me begging me to write a song for her for old times' sake. To please her, I said, "I'll see what I can come up with." But I didn't do anything. She destroyed our union. I continued my new single life while waiting for the divorce to be finalized. I was still doing studio music and writing new songs for other artists. As long as I was busy, I was fine. The only thing I looked forward to these days was when I performed with Helen. Speaking of Helen, we were still enjoying our monthly performances at the Gentlemen's Club. They became so popular that Helen suggested to the club management that they organize a Roaring Twenties themed evening, which was a great success. It was followed by other theme nights with music from the military 40s and the swinging 60s. With Helen in mind, I started writing songs for her vocal range that she could sing in the club. Valerie's career began to decline. Ted's next song was even worse, peaking at number 35 on the top 40. Both his and her careers peaked and declined. One Saturday night at the Gentlemen's Club after our music set, a smartly dressed older woman approached Helen, praising her singing. She said, "Helen, that last song suits your voice and style of music perfectly." Helen called her Aunt Kate and introduced me. She told her aunt, "Peter wrote the last song just for me. Helen, you should come visit next weekend. I insist that you bring your boyfriend," Aunt Kate ordered. Eventually, the older gentleman waved to Aunt Kate, pointing at his watch, indicating that it was time to leave. That weekend, with the help of Aunt Kate, I persuaded Helen to record a demo song at my next studio session, the following Wednesday, much to Aunt Kate's delight. On Wednesday, Helen arrived at 6 in the evening after the end of the music session. Bob led Helen into the studio booth for the demo recording. We both recorded background music, she on piano, me on guitar. Bob polished it up by adding double recording and electronic percussion. Senior executives at EMI listened to the raw recording and agreed that it and the song had the potential to become a hit. After some re-recordings with orchestral accompaniment, a single was released. Helen decided not to use her real name and adopted the pseudonym Lady Helen. The single quickly became a hit and entered the top 10 within a few weeks. Helen finally told me her big secret. She had a child from a previous marriage, and her parents were Lord Robert and Lady Christine Haslehurst. They were custodians of the family estate of Haslehurst in the west of the country. I was invited to meet her family for the weekend. Arriving on Saturday morning, I was struck by the size of the house, or was it more of an estate? Definitely a luxurious estate, with 20 or more rooms. The building was 150 years old and was in need of renovation. It was a busy Saturday night over dinner getting to know her entire family. I was finally introduced to Stephanie, my 5-year-old daughter. Stephanie now lived with her grandparents on the estate and attended Haslehurst Girls' School. I was also introduced to Helen's older sister Sylvia, her husband William, and their 2 daughters. After many requests from the crowd, we persuaded Helen to sing with me on Saturday evening. The whole family was surprised to learn that she was the latest popular singer in the top 40, Lady Helen, whose single is currently at number 5. All family members supported Helen in her desire to continue singing. Her mother told Helen that music had been part of their family history for 200 years. 2 weeks after meeting her parents, Lady Helen's next single was released. Another song of mine reached #1 on the charts after 3 weeks and stayed there for 5 weeks. Over the past 9 months, my relationship with Helen has matured to the point where we have become lovers. Helen invited me to move into her much larger apartment in the city. She quit her tedious job as an accountant at Prescott and Wharton to focus entirely on her singing career. Helen gave up the manager and accountant, performing these functions herself and hiring a part-time assistant to help, with a firm promise to me that she will always answer my calls. Despite not having a big ego, Helen and I still performed at monthly sessions at the Gentlemen's Club just for fun. It came as a surprise to everyone when Steve, Ted Bean's younger brother, sued Ted for stealing his songs that he wrote while in high school music class. Ted was ordered to pay his brother all royalties. As a result, Valerie kicked him out of the apartment and out of her life. Helen faced pressure from Emmy Music and various fan groups to hold a live concert, but she continued to put it off. However, as Helen was one of the top musical performers of the year, she was officially invited to sing at the Christmas concert for the King of England at the Royal Albert Hall, which was to take place the weekend before Christmas. She could not refuse this concert. This should have satisfied her fans and the record company at least to a small extent. To say that our parents were delighted is to say nothing. Helen insisted that the organizers invite our parents as guests. I was to accompany her on acoustic guitar while she played the piano and sang on stage. A month before the actual royal concert, I visited Helen's older sister, Sylvia. We agreed to meet at a time convenient for her. Sylvia lived just 10 miles from the estate in a renovated cottage on the grounds of Haslehurst Girls' School, where her husband was headmaster, and she taught history and English. The history of the main school building goes back 4 centuries, when the estate belonged to Churchill. The school building was the original home of the estate and was given to the school board for the establishment of the school. It was restored when the school was founded about 150 years ago. The school lands belonged to the Haslehurst family estate and generated an annual land tax. It was the best deal that the present Earl's great-grandfather ever made, to the satisfaction of all subsequent Earls. As a result, it became the main source of income for the family. From what Helen has told me, Sylvia is the rightful heir to the Haslehurst estate and, as the eldest daughter, has the honor of wearing the Haslehurst wedding ring. Her grandmother was the last one to wear it. William proposed to Sylvia with a ring 5 years ago. Sylvia invited me into the living room, where we sat opposite each other. "Sylvia," I said, "I'm going to propose to Helen at the Christmas family gathering." She said, "This is great news. I'm so happy for Helen and you, and I won't say a word." I continued, "Can I borrow Haslehurst's engagement ring to make a copy of it for Helen?" "What a great idea," Sylvia replied. Sylvia suggested Royal & Sons, the jewelry company that made the original Haslehurst ring 200 years ago. Sylvia continued to explain the history of the ring, the Haslehurst engagement. Ring has been passed down to the eldest daughter or eldest son's fiancé throughout the family's history. At the center of the ring is a large ruby surrounded by 8 diamonds, symbolizing the 8 generations of the Haslehurst family. She continued, "The jewelry company Royal & Sons approached me several times to borrow a ring. It turns out that all their designs for the jewelry were destroyed during the bombing of London during the Second World War. They wanted to create an electronic design of the ring for their records." She picked up her cell phone and made a call right then and there. After explaining the situation to the jeweler, they were happy to speed up the process. She made an appointment for me tomorrow at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We stood up and Sylvia said, "This is so exciting." Then, in a burst of enthusiasm, she hugged me. She took the ring off her finger, returned it to its original packaging, and handed it to me. The Royal Christmas concert was a huge success. Helen sang like an angel and received much applause. Drinks with HRH after the event were the icing on the cake. 2 days before Christmas, I picked up Helen's engagement ring from Royal & Sons. They called it the Hollingsworth ring. The ring cost only £30,000. The money was well spent. Royal & Sons only needed Hazlehurst's ring for a few days to make an electronic copy, after which they returned it to Sylvia. As a sign of gratitude, they restored the ring, making it look as if it had just been created 200 years ago. My parents were surprisingly invited to celebrate at Hazlehurst Manor. We arrived on Christmas Eve at noon to stay for 3 days. As a sign of respect, I personally addressed Lord Hazlehurst and his wife on Christmas Day. I asked permission to marry their daughter. Having received approval from both, Lady Hazlehurst embraced me in congratulations, and the Earl shook my hand, saying, "Excellent, young man." I showed them the ring made by Royal & Sons for Helen. Although it looked similar to the Hazlehurst ring, it was quite unique in its own right. On Christmas Day evening, after dinner, when the whole Hazlehurst and Hollingsworth family were gathered in the great drawing room, drinking hot toddies, I got down on one knee before Helen and asked for her hand. "Yes," she answered happily. I proudly placed the engagement ring on her finger. She then hugged me and kissed me on the lips. I received a little hug from Stephanie. While Helen admired the ring, I told the crowd how the Hollingsworth engagement ring was created, including Sylvia's invaluable help. I explained that in the center was an emerald, Helen's birthstone, surrounded by 10 diamonds, as Helen was the 10th generation of the Hazlehurst family. I hoped that the ring would be passed down from generation to generation in both families. After the rejoicing subsided, all the ladies wanted to inspect the wedding ring, agree on the wedding location, date, and outfitto. Meanwhile, the men went to the billiard room for brandy and cigars. After all, Helen already had a big white wedding. 6 months later, she decided to have an intimate family wedding in the chapel of Hazlehurst Girls' Private School in early summer. Helen invited several of her closest school friends and their spouses, including her former boss and mentor at Prescott and Wharton, Tom, and his wife, Mary. Stephanie was Helen's flower girl, and old school friend Bethany was honorary matron Helen. Of course, Bob was my best man. The small reception was held in the Hazlehurst School Ballroom and catered in the school kitchen. Always among the performers, I played the piano and Helen sang some of her favorite hits. We received rave reviews from our families and friends. We honeymooned on the small island of Bermuda for 2 weeks. I insisted that Stephanie come with us on our honeymoon. After all, we were family now. Plus, Helen and I would have plenty of privacy in the 2-bedroom suite. Our flight from Heathrow arrived around 10 p.m. at LF, Wade International Airport in Bermuda. The journey to the resort took another hour. By then, we were all so tired, we just went to the bedrooms to sleep. I opened my eyes to a light tropical breeze and warm sunlight streaming through the balcony door. I rolled over to kiss Helen good morning. She responded with a passionate kiss and moaned softly. "It looks like a beautiful morning," she said. "Exciting," I replied. "Do you think we have time?" she whispered between kisses. I turned over on my back, and we had sex. We were still recovering from our sexual pleasure when there was a knock on the door. A small voice said, "It's time to get up." Stephanie continued, "I made tea for everyone, and I can't open the door with a tray in my hands." Stephanie shouted back, "Just a minute. Your mom is going to the shower. I'll open the door now." Pulling up his boxer shorts to let Stephanie in. The tea was exactly what I needed to regain my lost energy. I thanked Stephanie for her concern. 2 weeks in Bermuda flew by too quickly, and soon we were returning to good old England. Upon returning to the estate, Helen learned that her new recording had exploded on the music charts, becoming her 4th top 40 song that year. Not long after our holiday, Helen told me she was pregnant and both families were delighted. While we were on vacation, the renovation of the so-called gatekeeper's cottage began. It originally had 8 rooms, and the architect planned to turn every other room into a bathroom, resulting in 4 bedrooms and a large master bedroom with a walk-in closet for us on the second floor. Stephanie was thrilled to have her own bathroom. A 4-car garage was built in the same style, using similar brickwork, to blend in with the original cottage. New modern kitchen, living and dining area have been replastered and painted, and also a music room for me. The house was decorated by both our mothers with money from Helen's songs. It was a mansion compared to our small 2-room apartment in the city. 6 months later, we all moved. It was Saturday afternoon. I was sitting in my music room when Stephanie came to the door and asked, "Peter, are you doing anything important?" I replied, "I have a melody in my head, but it just won't come out. Let's go horseback riding around the estate." "Why?" "You got mommy pregnant, so she can't ride now. That's why you're my next choice," she told me frankly. Looking at her timidly, I replied, I don't know how to ride." "Well, now's the time to start. Riding will help push that tune out." Stephanie encouraged me. "Is it true?" I laughed. "Come on, Peter, I have just the horse for you." She extended her hand to me. Old Betty was her name, big and round. It looked like part of a draft horse. Stephanie showed me how to saddle a horse. With some difficulty, I was able to climb into the saddle without throwing myself over the other side. Stephanie then demonstrated how to turn the horse in the desired direction, advising, "Use your knees as well, holding the reins tightly." As promised, Betty was easy to manage. She simply followed Stephanie's horse as we drove around the estate. Stephanie couldn't stop talking about what her school friends were doing, the latest Disney movies, and other movies her mom had banned. She was excited about participating in the school choir and wanted to join the theater group. Back at the barn, Stephanie showed her how to dry Betty, brush her fur, check her water, and put out her food. As we walked back to the cottage, the melody that had been playing in my head suddenly emerged clearly into my consciousness. "I got it. Thanks, Stephanie." I hugged her and hurried back to the music room. The walk became a Saturday ritual. Helen was the first to notice. We had just returned from our weekly father-stepdaughter trip, and without me realizing it, Stephanie had stopped calling me Peter and was now calling me Dad. The pressure on Helen from fans and the music company to perform a live concert featuring her top 40 hits was enormous. The concert organizers hoped to gather about 100,000 spectators. They offered Helen a prime spot and £3 million for a 2-hour concert. Organizers estimated that Helen could earn up to £1 million just from selling CDs and branded merchandise. So we decided to hold a live concert before the birth of our child. We arrived at Roundhay Park in Leeds, in the north of England, on the day of the concert and spent the morning checking the sound and equipment. Helen was 3 months pregnant, already beginning to plump, and had to perform for only 2 hours. Her sister's parents and family received free passes to attend the event. Bobby William was the other performer that night. It was suggested that he and Helen perform a duet on stage at the start of his 2-hour show. On stage, before the singing began, Helen introduced me as her songwriter, lover, husband, and father of her children, who would accompany her throughout the show. Then she started the concert. Towards the end of our 2-hour performance on stage, Helen announced, "Peter and I are expecting our first child. This song is dedicated to our child." Receiving loud applause from the audience, Helen revealed the title of the final song of the night, telling the assembled crowd its story, saying, "Peter wrote this song while he was at music university, and it was not specifically written for any particular artist, as another famous artist claimed." Her performance of the song, "The Cuckoo Cries," made the audience freeze, and there was silence. When she finished, there was a pause of 5 seconds, after which spontaneous applause began. The ovation lasted 10 minutes. We waved to the audience the entire time and then left the stage. 2 weeks later, we found out that Valerie had thrown a party during Helen's live concert, and several guests wanted to watch the show on the big screen TV. Hearing the last song, Valerie was furious. She smashed the TV screen with a bottle of champagne, and the guests left the building in panic, leaving her alone with her anger. It was reported that Valerie tried to sue Helen for performing a song she thought was hers, only to find out that she had no right to decide who could perform it because I wrote the song. With the announcement of Helen's pregnancy with our first child, I decided that we needed a private place, our place by the sea, where we could get away from the bustle of the estate. Unknown to Helen and Stephanie, I bought a small abandoned resort, Villa Bronte. This place is located on the cliffs overlooking Whitsand Bay and is within walking distance of the beach. The villa occupies about 15 acres of land and is hidden from view of the small village nearby. It faces the sea and has a large paved front yard with sun loungers to enjoy the ocean views. To the rear, there is a private pool, patio, and gas BBQ. On the ground floor of the villa, there are 2 bedrooms with ensuite bathrooms, a large, well-equipped kitchen, a spacious dining room, living room, media room, etc. On the second floor, there is a small TV room and 2 bedrooms plus bathrooms, a large balcony overlooking the English Channel. There are also 6 separate independent apartments scattered throughout the site. Each of the 6 two-story apartments has 2 bedrooms and a bathroom on the top floor for 4 adults or 2 single adults or children, each with a small balcony. On the ground floor, there is a small kitchen living room and a toilet with a laundry room. I purchased the villa at a bargain price and then spent about the same amount renovating it. The finished result was worth the effort. Now the whole Hazelhurst and Hollingsworth family could come here for the summer. Helen's parents and mine, her brother and his family could each have their own space. Everything was renovated in 6 months so we could spend some personal time with our firstborn and, of course, my writing partner, Stephanie. Our boy, Richard Peter Hollingsworth, was received into the loving arms of his mother after 6 months, much to the delight of the Earl. With the birth of Richard, Sylvia gave way to Helen in managing the estate. Sylvia quietly admitted that she and William had never wanted to be landlords of the estate, and Helen was far more qualified for the job. Now that we have a son, it seems like destiny. Richard would have to change his surname to Hazelhurst to inherit the family estate at the age of 21 if he wanted to take the title of Earl of Hazelhurst. We spent a week at the Hazelhurst estate to introduce Richard to the Hazelhurst and Hollingsworth relatives. This was followed by a baptism on Sunday in Hazelhurst School Chapel. The following weekend, I told Helen and Stephanie that I had rented an ocean villa for a week's getaway. We loaded our luggage into the trunk and Richard into his car seat and headed out for our week's vacation. Helen was delighted with the view from the front of the villa. Stephanie began looking for a room to claim. Richard had to sleep in a crib in our bedroom. Helen immediately stepped out onto the master bedroom balcony to take in the breathtaking views of the English Channel, letting in the sea air. After she found her room, Stephanie went to investigate. She returned a short time later asking, "Can I take a swim in the heated pool?" So we all put on our bathing suits and took a dip in the pool, including Richard naked. Later that first evening, I fired up the barbecue and we dined on lamb and salad. I drank cold beer. Helen abstained from wine. Stephanie preferred soda, and Richard breastfed. The week flew by quickly as we explored the seashore and rocky surf. We spent our days sitting on the sandy beach below the villa, with Richard sitting in the surf. On the last evening, as the last rays of the sun reflected off a few clouds, we found ourselves sitting on sun loungers in the villa's front yard, looking out to sea. Breaking the silence, I said, I could do this every weekend, to which I received nods of agreement. Continuing, I said, how about we buy this palace, and we can come here whenever we want? Helen said, is it for sale? No, it's already sold. I bought it 9 months ago and renovated it. What do you think? Stephanie was the first to react. Do we own this? Yes. Stephanie jumped up and hugged me, saying, what a smart dad you are. Helen, feeding Richard, said with a slight smile on her face, I was really wondering where that £6 million went. I wanted to ask you about it. Then a thought flashed through my head, maybe I'll get lucky tonight. Every 5 years, Helen meets with her best friends for a Hazelhurst alumni reunion. This year, it took place at the Subway Bar and Grill with 6 of Helen's high school friends and their partners, including myself. Valerie, who we didn't know about, became the new owner of the bar. I noticed that she stayed away from our table. After dinner, before coffee, Valerie deliberately embarrassed Helen. She walked onto the club stage, took the microphone, and announced, "Who wants to hear Lady Helen sing her latest song?" How could Helen refuse after all the applause from the visitors? Helen whispered in my ear as we walked onto the stage, and I nodded. I accompanied her on the piano while she sang The Cuckoo Cries, Valerie's biggest hit. As soon as Valerie heard the first bars of the song, she retreated to the kitchen and began rattling pots and pans during the song, trying to distract us, but to no avail. Helen's performance received a big ovation from the audience. Valerie came out of the kitchen after the song ended, politely clapping as we walked back to our table. I noticed that we didn't get a discount for the mini-concert. A month later, our family of 4 decided to go away to our villa for the weekend. They've both been annoying me for the past 2 weeks. Even though it was winter, it was still a great idea to get away. Helen knew little about cooking other than boiling water or boiling eggs. Breakfast was freestyle, lunch came as it turned out, and dinner I cooked using the barbecue. So it wasn't such a great vacation for me. When the milk ran out, I took a short walk to the village. Passing by a fisherman's hut, I noticed a sign in the window. Domestic help needed cleaning, washing, ironing, cooking, etc. Go inside. I asked the woman behind the counter as I was paying for the milk about the work needed sign in the window. She explained that Judith's husband, a mechanic, was killed when he jacked up the car and was crushed. Unfortunately, it was proven that he was at fault, so his widow did not receive insurance. As a result, she has a hard time making ends meet, and her sister-in-law can't stand her, so she has nowhere to go. I knocked on the cottage door. A well-dressed woman, whom I estimated to be 45 to 50 years old, answered. By age, she could be my older sister. I extended my hand, introducing myself. Peter Hollingsworth, my wife and I have just moved into a villa on the hill. Taking my hand, she replied, Mrs. Judith Brown, nice to meet you. I expressed interest in her job ad. Judith invited me into her neatly decorated living room. To shorten a long story, I asked her to come to our villa at 11 in the morning for an interview for the position of housekeeper, as described in her advertisement. Helen met Mrs. Brown at the door and led her into the dining room, where I was fiddling with sheet music while finishing my morning coffee. I greeted her and asked her to sit down, getting straight to the point. Helen doesn't know how to cook, and I do most of the cooking. We come here on vacation, and cooking is not part of my vacation plans. That's why we are looking for a housekeeper for all kinds of household chores, as you described in your ad. But we would both prefer you to live here. Would that be a problem? Mrs. Brown's face brightened more and more as I talked about being a housekeeper, ending with a big smile. She couldn't contain her excitement and said, When do I start? That's when Stephanie ran into the room, saying, Sorry, I'm hungry. I introduced her to Mrs. Brown, and she immediately said, Hello, Mrs. Brown. Judith replied, I'll start right now. Stephanie, show me the kitchen. Helen and I could hardly contain our joy at finding a local housekeeper who was accepted so quickly by Stephanie. Stephanie returned with a tray containing a sandwich and a glass of orange juice and sat down to eat. Because it was already almost noon, Mrs. Brown asked, Sir, madam, would you like some lunch now? Perhaps a cold meat salad? I replied, Yes, that will be fine. But don't call us sir and madam. Helen and Peter will be quiet enough. She objected, I cannot address you differently. You are my employers, sir. While Richard finally started eating solid food, Helen could afford alcohol for lunch or dinner. I asked, "Would you like a pre-dinner aperitif, perhaps a Pimm's with Indian tonic water and a slice of lemon?" "Oh, yes, please, that would be nice, dear," Helen replied. Mrs. H. Brown returned a minute later with 2 plates of cold meat salad. I asked where her plate was, and she said it was in the kitchen. I said, "Well, bring her here and eat with us. Now you are part of the family. Please, we insist." Stephanie added, "Yes, Mrs. Brown, you are my new Aunt B." From then on, Mrs. Rishi Brown became known to Stephanie as Aunt B. After lunch and further negotiations, we settled on Aunt B's salary, and I gave her a credit card for household expenses. She moved into one of the apartments the following week as her cottage's lease was ending at the end of the month. About 18 months passed, and we made a public announcement via a small press release for fans of Helen's music. It is with great pleasure that Lady Helen announces that she is pregnant with her 3rd child. Helen and I were having coffee in a small restaurant in East London when singer-songwriter Bobby Williams came to our table to congratulate Helen on her pregnancy. I invited Bobby to join us and began discussing his recent impromptu performance at the Subway Bar and Grill, which Valerie had encouraged him to do. He said, "I couldn't refuse without looking like a complete idiot, so I sang, but I'll never set foot in that bar again, and I've warned all my friends." Helen responded, "Bobby, do you understand that you performed publicly and are therefore entitled to payment for the performance?" A stunned Bobby replied, "I never thought about that." I suggested that he give the opportunity to all the other artists who were intimidated into performing at her bar to file a class action lawsuit and sue Valerie for unpaid performance fees. "We don't want to do this because of my close ties with Valerie. It will only cause unnecessary PR. But in the case of you and other artists, this will not be a problem. However, of course, it's up to you to decide." Before he left our table, he told us the news he had heard at the London hearing. It appears that Ted Bean, a songwriter who has become little known, has been left disabled after he was caught in bed with the mistress of one of the bosses of the underground gambling world. We expressed our regret. Every free weekend during Helen's pregnancy, we headed to the villa where she could relax and get away from business. Now she did all the accounting for Hazelhurst Girls' School, the estate, and our investments. Aunt B was a godsend, making our stay even more relaxing. Mom and Dad already vacationed there last week. Stephanie overheard me discussing with a representative from a local IT company about upgrading internet service for each apartment as we walked around the property. I insisted on 100 megabit wired connections for each building, allowing for multimedia entertainment services and full wireless coverage for cell phones, tablets, and laptops. 9-year-old Stephanie tried to follow us subtly. Suddenly jumping into the conversation, she said, "Sorry, all my friends use Apple TV for movies, and we have to subscribe to Netflix and Disney Channel." I looked at the representative and said, "From the mouths of babies they speak." A couple of days later, my father approached me with a proposal. The gist of it is that he and his mother are tired of living in a noisy London suburb and would like to move to the coast. He suggested, "Your mom and I would like to move here. How about we buy one of the apartments?" We all gathered around the dinner table discussing the merits of this proposal. Helen suggested, "Either buy an apartment or rent it." Helen then pointed out, "We're not trying to make money from you moving here, but we don't want legal complications with the various people who own the apartment buildings." I made a proposal. What if Dad pays a nominal rent every 3 months, similar to utility bills? We all agreed, and Helen drew up a simple contract to this effect and asked Aunt B to sign it as a witness. After some time, they put their house up for sale. After some time, Helen read a short article in the Times newspaper. Valerie Stein is being sued for an unspecified amount by a group of performers who claim they were intimidated into performing publicly at her bar and grill. Helen and I converted an unused barn into a modern recording studio called Hazlehurst Studios with permission from the Earl. We hired Bob, the top recording engineer from Emmy, with a big pay rise and a company car. Bob insisted on using a 48-channel Soundcraft analog recording board and Pro Tools software for final mixing and digital storage. The entire studio system was connected to a private network and had no internet access for security reasons. A separate Wi-Fi system for other devices provided only internet access. We took a weekend trip to Villa. By then, my parents had already lived there since Christmas. Their house had not yet been sold. Mom and Judith became friends like mother and daughter. They cooked together, went shopping, walked along rocky trails, and played cards, just to name a few of their activities. However, Dad seemed to miss his workshop. He called me aside and proposed. "Son," he said, "can I glass the open autoport and build a little workshop at the back of the garage so I can tinker with my woodcrafts?" "Dad," I replied, "draw a floor plan and I'll have an architect draw up a detailed plan for the builders that the local council will approve." I continued, "Don't skimp on your floor plan and then complain that you wish it was bigger." Pleased with my offer, he replied, "I will pay all the construction costs." Not wanting to argue with him, I agreed. One sunny morning, sitting in the front yard of a villa overlooking the ocean, I was browsing the entertainment section of the Times newspaper. I came across an interesting article. After months of legal wrangling, a case between Subway Bar and Grill over unpaid royalties to unidentified singers has been settled out of court. The news article also stated that Valerie Stein had sold the popular Subway Bar and Grill and disappeared. It is reported that Miss Stein may have moved to California, USA. Incredibly, in the same issue of the newspaper, in the Death Notices section, there was a message. Popular lead guitarist Bill Wilde once died of a substance overdose. His funeral. Back at the estate, we held a small celebration to mark the first anniversary of Hazlehurst Studios. Helen later informed me that the studio's record company was making good profits with recordings from local and international artists. I continued to receive commissions for writing music and lyrics for other artists. I performed regularly as a session musician just for fun. I was in the studio when Bob waved energetically at me through the double-glass windows. He ran inside, handing me my cell phone, saying, "This is Stephanie." I'm sure there was a look of confusion on my face, which soon turned to worry when I heard Helen's worried voice on the phone. I rushed to the car and drove to Hazlehurst School. Met Helen in the main reception hall of the school. She cried and threw herself into my arms, sobbing when we met. As I hugged Helen, I looked around between her, William, Sylvia, and the young woman who sat sobbing. I didn't know who to talk to first. William quickly explained. Helen's ex-husband, Rupert, came with a fake note allowing him to pick Stephanie up from school. Marie, the young woman over there who was still crying, led Stephanie out of the classroom so he could take her with him. As I held out the note, I quickly read it. It was a simple appeal. To whom it may be important, I, the undersigned, give permission to Rupert, Stephanie's father, my ex-husband, to pick her from school today, Wednesday, March 16th, due to a family emergency. The signature looked similar to Helen's, but was not it. William then said he called the police. Turning to the sobbing young woman, William said, "Marie, stop crying and go make us some tea. Bring it to my office." So we all went to the director's office to wait for the police to arrive. The police inspector finally arrived and asked some questions. The inspector suggested that Helen and I return home in case Rupert called the house phone. As we were about to leave, Helen's phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and said, "This is Stephanie calling." Helen was about to answer when the inspector said, "Answer the call and put it on speaker. Everyone is silent." Helen pressed the green button, then the speaker icon and said, Stephanie, where are you? Rupert's voice came through the small speaker. Hey, Helen, haven't spoken in a while. Steph is with me now. We're relaxing for a bit. Look, I need the money quickly and quietly. Don't call the police. Helen, this is between us. When I get it money, you can take Steph, okay? Helen, holding back tears, replied, You didn't hurt her, right? Of course not. She's my daughter. Are you stupid? Just listen, I need £1,000,000, preferably in £100 notes. I know you can afford it with your singing career, so don't argue. I'll call you tonight. 9 to give more details. Rupert then hung up. The inspector announced, There is nothing more we can do now. Go home. The police will be present at 9 this evening to listen to his call. Then, taking us aside, he quietly asked if we could get that amount of money if necessary. We have confirmed that we can, but it will take some time. We had just arrived home when her cell phone rang again, Stephanie's number. Helen replied, Rupert, what else do you want? He replied, I guessed that the school would call the police. You owe me my share of the apartment after the divorce. I figured it was about $1 million, okay? Why aren't you in jail yet? Getting out early for good behavior, muttered Helen. I want my daughter back. You bastard, Helen said harshly. Listen, bitch, I have debts to gambling dealers, and if I don't pay them, I'm dead. You must have a lot of money, and you owe me. His answer came. Helen suggested, instead of cash, Can I transfer the funds directly to the gambling syndicate? No, I need cash, now. Okay, Rupert, you've got the upper hand. I agree now, can I talk to Stephanie? Stephanie replied in a confident voice, Hey, Mom and Dad, I'm fine. We just ate at McDonald's and my ex-dad is taking us out for the night, so it's okay. Just pay him so I can come home. Helen replied, Yes, honey, stay warm, stay safe. We love you. Rupert interrupted, Okay, ready for instructions. Yes, Helen answered. Rupert continued, £1 million weighs about 20 kilograms. Everything should fit in a backpack in a pinch. I'll call and give you a meeting place tomorrow around 3 in the afternoon. That should be enough time to get the money. The call was interrupted. Helen called the inspector and told him about Rupert's latest demands. He will be present tomorrow at 3 o'clock. A message was sent out to all departments to find Rupert and Stephanie, but the inspector didn't have high hopes. We put Richard to bed, but we couldn't sleep ourselves. Helen calmed down. There were only 2 weeks left before the birth. It was tense enough without the kidnapping. I made tea and we sat on the sofa in the living room. I said to Helen, Well, since we can't sleep, how about you tell me about Rupert and yourself? Helen began to tell a sad story about her relationship with Rupert. At 21, I was quietly asked to marry Rupert Piddington, our parents, and he had been friends since school. Rupert was a stock market analyst. It seemed like he was everything I ever wanted. Handsome, kind, loving, sociable, famous, tall. He was a man of light with a promising career ahead of him. We had been friends since childhood, and I felt like this was what our families expected. Immediately after our honeymoon, we moved to an expensive apartment in West London. Our families expected an heir to appear as soon as possible, and 12 months later, we happily announced that we were expecting our first child. Our daughter Stephanie has been a blessing and a curse. It seemed to add pressure to our already fragile marriage. Over the next 18 months, Rupert began staying late at work, claiming to be busy. He came home with red eyes, disheveled. I started to think he was having an affair. One day, while I was shopping at a clothing store for Stephanie and was about to pay, I was informed that my credit card had exceeded the limit. I was terrified and used Hazelhurst's personal credit card, which I still carried with me. I tried to call Rupert, but the call was forwarded to his answering machine. I waited impatiently for him to return home that evening. It was 9 o'clock in the evening when the storm began. It all started when the doorbell rang. I opened it, and 2 men burst inside. I screamed in fear as the large man pushed me aside and entered. I screamed, "How dare you? I'll call the police." Without asking permission, the second, well-dressed man grabbed my hand. I tried to break free, but I couldn't. Finally, he pushed me into the living room and ordered, "Sit here." As soon as he turned away, I ran into Stephanie's room, picked her up and held her tightly to me, then returned to the living room and sat down. Taking my mobile phone out of my pocket, I tried to dial the police number. A well-dressed man came out of the bedroom and snatched the phone from my hands. "Without the police, where is your husband?" "At work," I answered. "No, he's not at work. Was he fired a month ago?" "You're lying. Why should I believe you?" Another big man came back from the bathroom and said, "He's not here." The well-dressed one said, "When you see him, tell him that we want our 100,000. Got it?" As soon as they left, I called my dad and told him what happened. First, he asked if the child and I were hurt. I confirmed that nothing was done to us. Dad then said to call the police and report a home invasion. Mom and Dad arrived immediately after the police took my statement. I described the men who claimed that my husband owed them money. I told the inspector that the well-dressed man had a scar on his left cheek in the shape of a question mark. The inspector accidentally dropped Soul Brothers. Mom rushed in at that moment, hugging me. I was still shaking and immediately began to sob inconsolably. Mom took me to the bedroom. Later, the father said that he asked the inspector who the Soul Brothers were. The inspector replied that they were known for their illegal gambling activities. The inspector gave Dad his business card and asked him to call if anything happened. After the police left, Dad asked if I had called Rupert's parents. In all the madness, I didn't. Dad called them to tell them about the events of the night. He spoke to Malcolm, Rupert's father, for about 20 minutes. Towards the end of the conversation, Dad screamed into the phone and hung up in anger. It turns out that Rupert's family knew about his gambling addiction for years, believing that marriage would cure him. They hoped that family responsibilities would force him to improve, but this only made the situation worse. And yes, he lost his job a month ago. It turned out that Rupert lost his entire inheritance gambling. His family was going to reject him. What made Dad so angry? They knew and couldn't tell me. I couldn't stay there another night, so we packed up as much as we could and went home to our parents. Mom drove my car because I couldn't stop shaking. It was after midnight and I couldn't sleep, so Mom made us all a mug of cocoa. We sat quietly, sipping hot drinks at the dining table. Then Dad came up with an idea. "Remember 2 months ago when your mom's pendant went missing? Mom only noticed it a week after you and Rupert visited." I screamed, "Do you really think Rupert stole it?" The next day, Dad called the inspector and told him about the missing pendant. Dad suggested that Rupert might have stolen it. He told the inspector that it had been registered with the local police as required by the insurance company. The pendant was still considered missing. Rupert turned out to be not a very skilled criminal. He was caught by the police when he left our apartment 2 days later. He admitted to stealing the pendant, which was returned a week later, to the delight of his mother. I immediately filed for divorce. He had to serve 8 years under Her Majesty's sentence. The next day, at 10 o'clock in the morning, Helen contacted our bank manager and arranged a large cash withdrawal of £1 million. We were supposed to pick up the money at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The manager called back to confirm the transaction, and Helen gave him the inspector's number to coordinate. The inspector and officer arrived 30 minutes before the appointed time. Our housekeeper made tea for everyone while we waited for Rupert to call. Rupert called at 3 o'clock. Helen was determined today. She put her mobile phone on speakerphone. Rupert's voice could be heard. "Okay, ready for instructions." "Yes," Helen replied coldly, "but before you say anything, I want to talk to Stephanie, or I'm hanging up." "Rupert." "Okay, I knew you'd want this." Stephanie's tone surprised us. Mom, I'm fine. Just give that idiot what he wants, okay? Rupert picked up the phone, telling us the meeting place North London, Highbury Field, next to the children's playground. Helen told Rupert that her husband Peter would be carrying out the handover as she was very pregnant. Rupert objected. Helen said it would be Peter or we would call the police to do it. Rupert grumbled but agreed, then asked for Peter's mobile number and hung up. The inspector promised to be discreet. The police will be present, saying, "You won't even notice us." With the money, I went to meet Rupert at the appointed place. Just as I was almost there, my phone rang. It was Rupert. Cut to old man. Meet me at the north end of the park by the public restrooms, next to the tennis courts. Then he hung up. As I walked towards the toilet block, Rupert and Stephanie came out of the ladies' room and approached me. I handed the backpack to Rupert and shook hands with Stephanie. Then two men came out from behind the toilets. As the handover was taking place, a well-dressed man shouted, "Rupert, give me my money." "Damn," Rupert shouted, pushing Stephanie into my arms, grabbing his backpack and running. The larger of the two men pulled out a gun and fired in our direction. The bullet hit Rupert in the back, but he continued to run. I threw Stephanie to the ground and the next shot hit me. My last thought was to protect Stephanie, so I fell on top of her. Lying on top of Stephanie, I saw police rushing to the scene from all directions. In the confusion, the shooter surrendered, throwing down his gun and raising his hands. The well-dressed man ran, trying to pick up the backpack, but Rupert wouldn't let go, so the man punched him. Then, taking his backpack, he ran towards the road. Stephanie asked from underneath me, "Daddy, why are you slobbering on me?" I answered with difficulty breathing. I think I was shot. Then I lost consciousness. At home, Helen and Sylvia eagerly awaited Peter's call confirming the successful transfer. When the phone finally rang, Helen answered, barely breathing. "Hey, Peter, did you pick up Stephanie?" Instead, the inspector replied, "Sorry, Mrs. Hollingsworth, Peter has been shot." Helen nearly fainted, dropping her phone and screaming, "Peter's been shot." Luckily, Sylvia was there to help Helen sit on the sofa while she sobbed into her handkerchief. Sylvia picked up the phone, asking in her best teacher tone, "Who am I talking to?" After listening to the inspector's answer, she reprimanded him for his harshness, reminding him that Helen was very pregnant. After finishing the call, Sylvia said, "We'll be there as soon as possible." "Helen, Peter is alive, just injured. Stephanie and Peter have been taken to St. Pancras Hospital. We need to get going." Stephanie and Peter were rushed to the hospital emergency room. Doctors immediately took Peter to surgery. After it was determined that Stephanie was unharmed, a nurse helped clean Peter's blood from her face and hair. Sylvia dropped Helen off at the entrance while she parked the car. Helen found Stephanie sitting in the emergency room waiting room. They walked together to the surgery waiting area. They held hands, crying together, until Sylvia joined. Helen's parents arrived to console them. An hour later, Peter's parents arrived. A police inspector finally came to tell the assembled family. Rupert was shot and died on the spot. We have the shooter and his boss in custody, both arrested. Additional charges will be laid, but murder and attempted murder are at the top of the list. Seems unknown to Peter, the gambling syndicate followed the house and followed his car to the exchange. Although Rupert's death is sad, he himself is to blame for what happened. All this excitement is too much for Helen. She went into labor and was taken to the maternity ward. Stephanie was able to hold her mother's hand during labor and later told Peter about it in detail. I woke up in the recovery room the next day. I'll be able to leave the hospital in a few days. Stephanie told me that my mother gave birth to our daughter that night and that she was a healthy baby girl. Helen arrived in my room in a wheelchair and handed over our daughter to Stephanie so I could admire her. The three of us discussed names for girls and decided to name her Claire Helen Hollingsworth. Helen took us to our villa as soon as I was discharged, where I recovered. Aunt B took care of us, becoming a surrogate mother figure for Claire when needed. Richard, now 2 years old, proved to be restless, often running away. Luckily, his grandparents kept a close eye on him. While we were there, I started writing music again. Helen and Stephanie helped me write the lyrics to a new song for Lady Helen called "Don't You Want Me? Don't You Love Me Anymore?" Helen's new song. Her first recording at Hazelhurst Studios, when released, became a hit for Lady Helen, topping the charts for 3 weeks and remaining at the top for another 5. This led to many phone interviews on the radio and live appearances on television shows. This also led to the release of an album. I had work to do, write 5 more songs. Mom and Dad sold their house over a year ago and have settled into their apartment nicely. Dad equipped his new workshop with all the tools from home. He spends many happy hours working on his new woodworking machine, making all sorts of things from wooden toy cars to trains for Richard. He also carries out minor repairs and modifications throughout the villa. Both my parents are happy about the move, which makes both Helen and me happy. An added bonus was that Aunt B was no longer left alone between our visits. All this happened 5 years ago. I am now 41 years old, and our 2 youngest children are now at Hazelhurst Private School. The school became mixed for financial reasons. This made it easier to choose a school. The children ride horseback across the fields of the estate every day to school. As for Helen and I, we moved into the main house of the estate after some necessary renovations. The Earl and Countess of Hazelhurst now live in the gatekeeper's cottage. Helen retired from her public music career, except when we sing a duet in the shower. End. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.